This is Diana Payton, and this is Technical Writing Uncensored. I'm here with Mike Jang, a pillar of the Portland Technical Writing community, the old man of the mountain of Write the Docs PDX, and I don't have to include those explanations if you don't want to.
It's all right. I'm just astonished that
Well,
to be called such things.
you've been around at all of the Write the Docs that I've been to, and granted, I haven't been there in a few years, but you're always this presence, just kind of there and exuding like knowledge and wisdom, and you just seemed to be this really cool person who seemed to know everything. So
Very
whether you
kind of
knew
you to say.
it, well, if that's not true of you, then you did a great job faking it. All right, what should people know about you, Mike?
Gosh, okay, that's an interesting way to start. I enjoy testing things. I mean, the fun of tech writing is actually testing new products, seeing how they work. Most frequently banging my head against the wall until I get things working. And when I do, I say, aha, I got to write about this.
Yeah, or occasionally, I need to tell the engineer about this.
Absolutely. In one tech writing job, I was in the same office as QA. We became best of work buddies and essentially started competing on where how many bugs we found.
Yeah. Oh, I loved that. I was once on the same floor as QA and had a great relationship with them. One time, I and my QA partner were comparing notes on what we were testing for the team, and our notes didn't match up. So we went and talked to the product owner and said, "Okay, what's going on here?" And he's like, "Oh, I've got this spreadsheet. I figured this is what you guys need to test. This is what you need to write about, and this." And she looked at it and said, "Huh?" She said, "That is a beautiful spreadsheet." I just about died off of corner. And she very nicely said, "Never do this again. Just send it all to us. We'll figure it out." Don't tell us anymore. Anyway, besides testing things, why technical writing? You have a Red Hat engineer certification and
Yep,
apparently love Linux. So
absolutely. I mean, it fit what I was doing, which is how did I get into technical writing? Which
mhm,
is I did it backwards. I
mhm.
started by writing technical books. In '99, I needed a job and basically started crawling, asking around, trying to get contacts. And somebody posted on some board I don't remember saying I could use some help writing a few chapters. And I said I think I know how to write. I wrote a couple of chapters for him. He said, "Oh, this looks good." A month later, he came back to me and said, "Mike, I don't have time to finish this book. Here's the name of my agent. You can finish it for me if you have time." And all of a sudden, I had a new career.
And how did you end up with Linux as a specialty? Because you told me you were a Linux technical writer, which was a new title that I had not heard of. So please tell me
Okay,
more.
my agent said, "Mike, you got to learn Linux. I've got all this demand for Linux books and nobody to write anything about them." So I started teaching myself Linux. My first book was actually on Windows 98 of all things.
Okay. I suppose someone
But
had to write about it.
yeah, exactly. So I started trying different Linux distributions. I took an extension course in Berkeley with one of the people, essentially one of the students behind Unix was teaching other people how to do it, and it turned out he was teaching using SUSE Linux. So I started trying different distributions. Decided, gee, I like this command line thing, and went from there. Started writing books. But essentially, I got into Red Hat and thought, okay, let's take on this challenge. How to pass this Red Hat certified engineer exam, which was a hands and still is a hands-on exam. At the time in '02, it included before broken VMs with things like kernel panics or broken bootloaders, things that really confuse the heck out of people. But I learned, okay, this is how you do it. And well, I mean, I could get into a lot of details, but I barely passed the first time. But I was on my way writing my book on the Red Hat Certified Engineer exam.
All right. Why Red Hat
Uh,
rather than Ubuntu?
Red Hat had a certification. Ubuntu
Ah.
wasn't stable with their certifications.
And how did that get you to GitLab or Cobalt? And by Cobalt, I
Ah,
mean the company, not the language.
right. Essentially, it got to the point where, as the internet developed, people started copying things like movies and songs and books,
Mm-hmm.
which started hitting my royalties. So I
Yeah.
decided I needed something else. I worked for 7 years for a company called ForgeRock, where I developed weird sorts of expertise in things like DocBook and identity management. Eventually, that got me to places like GitLab and Cobalt. But I think the most fun I had, I guess, were in two levels. One, I was at a conference sitting next to a IT administrator who's just had a normal conversation. Hey, Mike, what do you do? Turned out that IT administrator was, to keep this unnamed, but attractive, I'll say, yeah, an IT administrator from an Ivy League university who said, "Oh, I need a solution to that." So I went to my Get Started guide. I typed in a few commands and shows this administrator, this is what we do and how we can solve your problem. That actually turned into a sales lead.
And that is a wonderful segue into Dox's sales. Because
Exactly.
so we're talking a while ago about Dox's sales because we know about Dox's code and Dox's
Hmm.
tests, but you have a theory that Dox's sales should also be a thing.
Hmm. Yep. I mean, it struck me as strange in my time earlier as a tech writer that we put out all this documentation, and yet the sales engineers would create their own stuff. And I've always wondered why. But I'm now to the point where we're actually working with sales engineers to make documentation that will work as sales tools to do the kind of thing I did with that quote unquote Ivy League IT administrator. Actually attract them to the product that we have.
How so? How do you make documentation also a sales tool? I mean, I've always thought that documentation could be like a selling point, but if you have good documentation, that it helps use the product. But an actual sales tool, please tell me more.
Yep. Portia Burton back in 2021 came out with a article entitled "Nerds Don't Respond to Marketing," and if, with your indulgence, and if this works, I'm going to share my screen.
Totally. And either way, it will be linked in the description, guys.
Yep, nerds don't respond to marketing. Try technical documentation instead.
Nice.
And it fits with a theory espoused by Adam Devander in a book called "Developer Marketing Does Not Exist." Well, of course it
Hmm.
exists, but the right way to do it, according to Adam, is with technical documentation. And done properly, it's done at the top of the funnel. How do you introduce somebody to your product? How do you show somebody, hey, this might be a good product for me? You do it at the top of the funnel, and that starts with the get started guide that anybody can use. Anybody in the quote unquote target audience. To complete the thought, things in the middle of the funnel are things like tutorials and how to guides. Things at the bottom of the funnel are API guides, which is sort of a diss for people who do API documentation, but it's something that people consider last, typically after they purchase a product.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because you don't care about the API guide until, or how good it is until you're actually trying to make a call. You're not going to try
Hmm.
and make a call generally until you're at least testing it out and fairly far
Right.
along the sales. For a lot of my career, I joked that I was allergic to marketing, and I know that I'm not the only one because often the battle that technical writers have with marketing or sales is trying to keep the fluff out of the documentation. So,
Hmm.
how do we get over it and learn to make a good partnership with those people?
I think I've started hinting at it. How do
Sure.
you create documentation that salespeople can actually use?
Hmm.
Uh, yes, you do want to avoid the fluff words, things like easy and simple and
Yeah. Hmm.
things that marketers love. You may have to compromise a little bit in the get started guide because that's sort of the bridge between
Hmm.
marketing and detailed documentation. But once you do that and get your salespeople on board, you can sell documentation as a tool to support sales, which turns documentation from a cost center into a profit center.
So, turning documentation from a cost center into a profit center. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay, for the newer people out there who don't know, can you explain what that means and why they should care?
anything that's a cost center is subject to cuts, which is something to pay attention to in this market.
Yeah,
Uh,
because if a cost center is called that because it costs, a
exactly.
profit is called center is called that because it brings in profit. And even in if the economy is not horrible, we always want to be bringing in money rather than costing money. So
Right.
this is where doing that internal PR comes in and making sure that you are in the net positive. This is so finding ways that you can say that the documentation is helping the company make money besides just saving support calls, also actively
Hmm.
making sales.
Yes, having saving support calls is a valuable thing,
True.
but it seems ancillary to the idea of actually using docs as sales.
Mhm. How would you go about proving that documentation helped make a sale?
That is somewhat subjective. The question becomes, do your sales engineers actually use your documentation?
Hmm.
And we've been we've been pushing that in part by incorporating our training materials into our documentation.
Okay. So, how should documentarians talk about what we do so that sales folk and marketing folk understand? Like, how should someone and like leading a small documentation team or maybe a sole writer start that conversation?
We can help you sell your product. At Cobalt, I put together a get started guide that, well, the reaction to that internally blew me away, where the founder says, "Hey, Mike, this makes our product 100 times better." And I'm thinking, wait a second, I did that?
What makes documentation more salesy in a good way, in a technically good way?
You want a credible message that a potential customer, specifically usually developers, sometimes systems engineers, can do fairly quickly.
Mhm.
You want follow-ups where the potential customer can actually introduce their product, their data, etc., into your product and say, "Oh, it actually works for me."
Yeah, so I think I've heard that as like the time to wow or the time to win. Like time
I
till they like very quickly get them successful with your product and doing stuff so that hopefully they'll want to pay money, right? And do
Mhm.
more.
Not familiar with the term, but it's credible.
Okay. Got any other good stories about that?
a really proud moment was at a customer conference where we were presenting our docs to our products to our customers, where I set up with a lot of help the way for customers to combine three of our products together. I set up a series of commands to make that happen, and it was a little more exciting than anticipated because I couldn't make it work until a final pull request that happened while I was on a plane to Austin. This was 2017, and airplane Wi-Fi was about as fast as dial-up modems. So there I am trying to get the git commits to actually merge, and thought on my way in, this actually works. The next morning, there I was in the Austin City Limits Auditorium talking about the process.
So you actually lived the meme. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in prod. Before memes were a thing.
Right.
Nice. All right. Speaking of events, you speak at a lot of events. Why? Why
Why
are you
not?
such a fair enough? But
Uh,
you seem like you have. Do you just have a lot of thoughts? Do you just like getting comped tickets, or what's the motivation there?
People at Write the Docs is an excellent conference, but it's a
Hmm.
silo. It primarily consists of technical writers. Not only do I like to speak at events, I like to speak at events outside of our silos, specifically events. Yes, I'll talk about documentation, but it's important to me to get the message out. This is what we can do for you as tech writers.
What is that message like?
I mean, I don't have a specific message
Hmm.
per se, but pardon me, contained within the presentations I've made.
Hmm.
The last one was how to open source your documentation repository, get yourself involved in the community.
Hmm.
Lessons applied to every sort of open source or potentially open sourceable repo. I've done stuff on UI text. And the first time I did it, the room had about 100 people at the open source convention. I took a poll during my talk, and one other person there was a writer.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'm reaching an audience.
So you're actually getting the developers to think about documentation at
Mhm,
in their developer spaces.
mhm,
Only good can come of that. Yeah, and that I'm serious. That's not sarcastic. Because
mhm. I try to add little bits and pieces. An older techie will notice that and say, "Hey, Mike, did you work for Sun?"
nice.
And actually, I didn't. I mean, I got this as part of a community, but it starts the conversation with older developers,
Hmm.
with the people who understand the products, the architects, the chief engineers. At which point I can start. I can't think of a better way to put it, espousing the gospel of documentation.
You are a documentation evangelist. Yeah, making your way. Oh, documentation missionary, making your way to the wilds of the developer conferences and preaching the good word of up to date documentation and references.
Something like that.
Okay. Got any other good stories?
Well, I believe it or not, I've set up my notes in in VI, VI as in
Oh, VI.
VI, the text editor.
Ah, okay, yes.
Just going to share my screen again real quickly. You see my notes in VI,
Hmm.
and it's a habit I have. It's something I do. It's something that gives me empathy with developers who also use text-based tools.
Hmm.
I mean, I could go into the command line and do what they do. My specialization in Linux gives me credibility. I can call BS on developers
Hmm.
who mess up things at the command line and say,
Hmm.
"Oh, you're not supposed to do things this way. You're supposed to." Example: There's a difference with Linux services between restarting a service and reloading a service.
Mhm.
If you restart a service, anybody who's connected to that service gets kicked off. And you don't want to do that in production unless absolutely necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that kind of circles back to, what we talked about at the beginning of this when I kind of said, well, why the Red Hat certification? And I mean, you have empathy, you have credibility, and, you know, is this a path that you would recommend to other technical writers trying to, go the certification route and become more technical that way?
Not necessarily the certification route. The Red Hat certification is sort of unique, being a hands-on exam. There are most certifications out there make you quote unquote into a paper tiger. You get a certificate, you can put it on your wall. It buys you nothing in terms of credibility. If you
Hmm.
say you've been certified as a Red Hat certified engineer, and I can say I've passed the exam 3 times, people will listen when you say, wait a second, you've got to reload and not restart.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, any other words of wisdom regarding getting connecting with your SMEs there?
Not only do you want to use the tools that they use, like whether it be VI, VS Code, or whatever, you want to, I mean, that'll show empathy. You want to know enough about your product, your documentation set, etc., to know when to call BS on them.
Hmm.
And honest developers will appreciate that.
Do you think that this would help an aspiring technical writer or a new technical writer stand out in the crowd?
I mean, I've been in the job market relatively recently, and all I see are people with resumes that say, I'm an excellent writer, or I can learn things quickly. And that does not make you stand out.
So, how should they
You
stand out?
you stand out by having not necessarily SME, but authoritative knowledge on the topics that a hiring company works with.
Hmm.
At minimum, when you apply to a company, you want to be able to test their product, test their get started guide. Does it do the kind of sales job that I've talked about? If they
Hmm.
have problems, you can say, this is where I can help you.
Yeah, so come in with specifics, not generalities.
Exactly. Specifics. This is where I can help you. If you have the time, even submit a pull or merge request to say, this is an example of how I can improve your docs.
Mhm. What if they do not have open source documentation?
That becomes a little more difficult, but personal opinion, a lack of open source in a product may be an indicator and not necessarily true of the environment of the company.
Hmm. Fair enough. So, you have a blog. Has that been
Mhm.
useful to you?
Honestly, I'm not sure, but it was a good place for me to essentially store what I write about.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
blog is ai-techwriter.com.
it will be linked in the description. Yeah, I've had several people I've interviewed recommend that new tech writers start a blog because that gives them a place to kind of practice writing as well as have their samples and start to build their
Hmm.
brand.
Yep,
But,
I have samples there. I built it in Hugo, a static site generator, based on, in this case, on a GitLab repository, where
mhm.
at least for a while I tried real hard to show linear Git histories.
But now what? Now have you given up on being linear?
I'm happily employed as a principal tech writer for Nginx/F5, so I have different priorities.
Besides potentially starting a blog and being specific, what other advice do you have for people in this job market, especially if they're newer technical writers?
AI can be your friend. It can help you substitute for the technical experience that I was talking about, but you need enough information from AI to actually test the products of your target companies.
Okay, so AI specifically your friend for prepping for an interview.
Prepping for an interview, preparing for an application,
Mm, okay, cool. Yeah, maybe practice interview questions.
practice interview questions, but also setting up a pull request saying that
Hmm.
you use AI to help you understand a company's product, assuming you as a human go beyond AI with your understanding. Don't just submit an AI-based pull request.
No, do not. Yeah,
Mhm,
people in the know will spot that. Do not do it.
mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
absolute kiss of death, guys. So, is AI coming for our jobs?
AI will enhance our jobs. There's a lot of talk about AI, about the term hallucinations.
Hmm.
I think of hallucinations from AI as mansplaining as a service. It's AI doing its best, making extrapolations, which
Hmm.
is what the essence of what mansplainers actually do. I mean, sometimes they don't intentionally over explain things, but
I sometimes think of it as a pocket SME that's slightly senile, and so you just have to to check all of its work.
Tim O'Reilly, the guy behind the O'Reilly books,
Hmm.
is referred to AI as the equivalent of having 100 interns. And based on personal experience trying to set up prompts, it's like not only are they 100 interns, but there are 100 teenage interns who you have to remind them a bunch of times. I already told you, follow this style guide.
Yes. Well, thanks for joining me, Mike. I really enjoyed chatting with you. And this has been another episode of Technical Writing Uncensored. If you enjoyed this interview and want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. And have a good one.
Thanks so much for this.
Thank you, Mike.